Middlesex County Museum and Historical Society. We are delighted that you chose to spend a bit of your afternoon with us. For those of you who have not met, my name is Besida Cawthorn-White, and I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the Middlesex County Museum and Historical Society. I want to welcome you on behalf of our President, Marilyn South, our Vice President, the Reverend Bob Pritchard, our Executive Director, Holly Horton, and all of our board and advisory board. And so welcome. We are absolutely delighted that we are able to have this speaker with us today. Her name is Meg Hughes. I've known her for a long time. We go back years at the Valentine Museum in Richmond, and so we are delighted to have her. Before, though, we proceed with Meg, there are some things I'd like to say to you. We invite you to visit the Middlesex County Museum. We're located at 777 General Puller Highway, right in the center of the village of Saluda. Our present hours are from 1 to 3 on Sundays and from 1 to 5 Wednesday and Friday. Our current exhibition focuses on fossils that were found in this county and artifacts from the indigenous people of this county. It really is a very captivating exhibition, and so that we hope that you will visit. We will be closed Wednesday and Friday of this week in observance of the Thanksgiving holiday, but we will be open again on next Sunday, and so do please visit with us. We ask you to join the museum. We'd like you to be a part of us. We ask you to look forward to things we have going on next year and make sure that you're on our mailing list for future events. And among those are, we're working on an exhibition on the historic district Saluda. It's been declared historic on the National Register of Historic Places and Virginia Landmarks. We're looking to explore the intricacies of Saluda. We're also working on an exhibition on African-American businesses in Middlesex County that will open next year. And then finally, we invite you to look forward and join us next year when we will be dedicating a highway marker for Antioch Baptist Church, which is the oldest African-American church in Middlesex County. And the museum co-sponsored that monument, the application, at least for that marker, with Antioch Baptist Church. And so do expect to hear from us. And we hope that you will be able to join us in person for some of those things. And so we do want to get started with the matter of the day. As Greg has said, we ask that you remain muted when you are, while our speaker is speaking, so that we will hear her clearly. If you have questions for her, we invite that you put them in the chat. We will pull those out of the chat at the end of her talk. And if time allows, we may even be able to take oral questions, but we do ask you to put questions in the chat. And so Meg Hughes is such a wonderful resource in our community. She is the Director of Collections and Chief Curator at the Valentine Museum in Richmond, downtown Richmond. And Meg has been with the Valentine since 2004. She holds an AB in History from Princeton University and earned her Master of Science in Information, specifically Archives and Records Management, from the University of Michigan. Through inventory, digitization projects, research services, and exhibition, Meg manages the manuscript, book, and photographic collections in the Valentine's internationally recognized holdings. And so we are just delighted to have Meg. Please give her a warm virtual Middlesex County welcome. So Meg, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Besida. I am really pleased to talk with you all this afternoon. I've done this talk in person before, but we're still living in a somewhat virtual world, so happy to deliver it virtually. So I'm going to do my administrative screen sharing so I can get straight, and then I will get started. There we go. Okay. Does everyone see those slides? Thumbs up? Great. Okay, so let's get started. So again, my name is Meg Hughes. I'm Deputy Director now, just had a title change at the Valentine. Again, I have been with the museum for almost 20 years, focusing on our archival collections. And so I have certainly had many collections that have needed preservation, rehousing over my years at the museum, and then personally my own papers at home. And so I'm going to be sharing some tips on the care of family papers and photographs this afternoon to give you an overview of what type of archival holdings we have at the Valentine, which has been open since 1898 in downtown Richmond. Our mission is to collect, interpret, and preserve the history of Richmond, Virginia, and vicinity. We operate Richmond History Galleries, the historic Wickham House, and the Valentine Sculpture Studio, which houses the work of the artist Edward Valentine. And so our archives, which is only one portion of our collection, we also have objects and art and costume and textiles, but we're focusing specifically on archival materials. We have photographs. This includes early photographic methods like daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and tintypes, mounted and unmounted prints like carte de visite and cabinet photographs, 35mm slides, any sort of format you can think of. And we've even gotten into digital born photograph collecting as well. Books include a reference library related to Richmond history and relevant curatorial eras, as well as rare books written by Richmonders or published and printed in Richmond. We have manuscript collections, including family papers, business and organizational records, as well as quite a few collections that fall under the umbrella of ephemera. And these are things like greeting cards, postcards, tickets, menus that are ephemeral in nature, meaning that they were created for a temporary or transactional purpose and were not meant to be kept long term. So think of like a ticket stub that was meant to allow admission into an event. Ironically, people tend to save these transactional temporary items as souvenirs and memories of events that occur. And so these tend to find their ways into family papers, especially scrapbooks, and can pose all sorts of preservation challenges. We also have large format items, including maps, prints, newspapers, posters, broadsides, and architectural drawings. And so we have a lot of historic paper-based material to care for. And so this afternoon, you'll hear about some practical ways to preserve your own unique family papers. So what is paper, first of all? We all have a lot of it. It takes up a lot of space. It's heavy. And it requires a lot of organization. A lot of us feel like we're drowning in paper. But what is it? So paper is fiber made from the pulp of a variety of materials: cotton rags, straw, linen, wood, or other plant fibers that have been suspended in water and pressed into sheets. And depending on what these fibers are, they will degrade at different rates when exposed to light and different environmental atmospheres. Acid, which is in these fibers, contributes to paper's loss of flexibility over time that makes it break down over sometimes years, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries, depending on the quality of the paper. So older, generally meaning 19th century or earlier paper, tends to be of higher quality than more modern paper. So on the left here, we have a 19th century newspaper from Richmond, which will, generally speaking, be in better shape, assuming that it's been housed in a suitable environment, than the mid 20th century book and newspaper clippings that you see on the right. And that's because in going into the 20th century, as there was a proliferation of more and more things being published, the quality of paper went down. And so you tend to have much more acid concentrated paper that degrades much more quickly than what you would have found in earlier centuries, where you had really high quality products like silk being incorporated even into newspapers. So before we get into tips for preserving family papers and photographs, it's important to define two terms: preservation versus conservation, because they tend to be used interchangeably by a lot of people, but they actually are very different things. So preservation refers to the storage, handling, and environmental conditions under which materials are kept to preserve their physical state and prevent further deterioration. Preservation is not intervention or conservation, which is the application of focused attention and techniques to examine, document, treat, and conserve physical objects. Or in other words, providing some direct treatment to materials to stop deterioration or reverse the signs of aging. So preservation is prevention. It is trying to halt the deterioration of materials from declining any further or slowing the degrading process. It is not trying to clean or repair an object yourself. Even within the museum at the Valentine, we do not perform conservation. We don't have conservators on staff. If there's something that needs to be washed or repaired or mended or flattened in some sort of way, we bring in professional conservators. And so what we're looking at tonight is preservation of family materials. So the easiest and most important way to preserve your family papers and photographs is to keep materials in an environment with stable and consistent temperature and relative humidity. This is not generally found in attics or basements. You should aim to keep your materials in a climate-controlled space, meaning it is heated and cooled throughout the year. The space should have good air circulation and not be dirty or dusty. Light fades paper and makes it brittle, so materials should be kept out of direct light as much as possible. So the way I think of it is, if it's not a place where humans or pets may reside, it's not where you want to be keeping your treasured family heirlooms. So oftentimes, the best place to store materials is in a closet. And so again, if it's somewhere that's comfortable for you, it's somewhere that's going to be okay for your family papers and photographs. So what are some of the dangers? Even in a conditioned space, there can be some areas of your house or a building where you don't want to put family materials. You want to store papers away from direct sources of heat and water, such as heat pumps, dryers, fireplaces, radiators, bathrooms, washing machines, and dishwashers. You never know when there's going to be a leak or when something's going to catch on fire. And once the damage is done from either water or for fire, oftentimes there's very little that you can do. Insects love to snack on paper and can literally eat away at your family records. Vermin can make nests in boxes and can leave droppings. So you want to avoid keeping boxes of materials directly on the floor. Instead, try to keep them on shelving so that they're not in direct contact with any critters that may be in different spaces. Because even in our living areas, there are potential still for there to be some sort of critter gets in, and what you don't want to do is have an infestation and for them to turn that box into their home. If you find bugs in a box of family papers, you want to isolate the affected box and rehouse the documents in a new clean box to prevent the bug populations from spreading. You also want to be aware of humidity. If you have things in an area that's too humid and has poor air circulation, mold and mildew can begin to become a problem, especially if there are documents that already may have had some mold or mildew on them, and then it goes into a bloom period. If this happens, you want to, again, isolate the affected documents to prevent growth from spreading, and it's best to contact a professional if you want to salvage moldy or mildewed materials. And we'll talk a bit about how you make contact with professionals in a bit. So once you find an appropriate place to hold your papers and photographs, you will need to use something other than just a regular old cardboard box. Ideally, you'll be storing your treasured family papers and photographs in archival quality materials. So what does that mean? Archival quality, that means that the paper is of high quality with no acid. So it's high quality fibers that are going to degrade very, very slowly and will help create buffers with the inherent acid that you find in a lot of the papers that you're trying to preserve. Oftentimes these products, these archival quality products are called, you'll see the terms acid-free or buffered. Those are good things that you want to see advertised. So the typical types of supplies for storing papers and photographs are going to be acid-free folders, document boxes. The sort of typical archival box is this flip top that you see here so that things can be stored vertically. That's sort of the classic box, but you don't have to use that. There are archival quality banker boxes for larger amounts of material. There are shoebox style boxes for smaller materials. You can buy book covers if you want to keep dust away from rare books that you have or family Bibles, things like that. You can buy acid-free paper that you can use to interleaf. It's tissue paper as well to wrap things in and create buffers. You can buy, it's called cotton tape. It's like a string that is flat, so it doesn't have any, it doesn't create stress when you're tying things. Sometimes this can be used if you have, say, a book with the cover that has fallen off and you want to keep the two together. You can use some of this cotton tape to tie a bow around it, kind of like a package. You can also buy Mylar, which is a safe archival quality plastic. It comes in sheets and lots of different sizes of envelopes that you can use. If you have something that's really brittle that you really want to protect, you can plop it into a Mylar or polyester plastic that's not going to degrade over time. So there are quite a few archival suppliers out there. These are not all of them. These are just some suggestions. At the end of my presentation, you will get a PDF document that has this contact information, so you don't need to write it down, as well as sort of a summary of some of the things I'll be talking about. But these are some archival suppliers. You can sometimes find some archival materials through general office supply stores. The thing to know with archival storage is that it is quality material, so it is expensive. And so it is an investment. I would say that if you find that acid-free folders and boxes are outside of your budget, that is fine. There are ways around it. You could buy regular office folders. I wouldn't get the ones in the multicolored ones. I would just get the plain manila color, and you could buy, say, acid-free paper and line the folder. You could have a non-archival banker box and line that with acid-free tissue. And so there are ways that you can work within a budget and still create the best environment to preserve your family materials. So now we're going to start taking a look at a variety of different types of objects. We're going to start with books. And so we're going to talk about some typical problems and then some tips on how to handle and how to store books. So a lot of times you'll see things like broken spines and bindings, the text block or the pages inside the covers are brittle and torn. If you have leather bound books, a lot of times the leather will dry out and will become, it'll create sort of this red dust that's called dry rot, and it can make a huge mess. You can see ripples on the right-hand side from water damage, and you can even see spines bending over time if they haven't been stored with enough support. So for storing books, Unless they're really oversized, storing upright on shelves is fine. You do want to try to keep them stored a couple of inches away from a wall. So you don't want to necessarily push them all the way to the back of your bookcase because you want to allow for air to circulate. You don't want them to be, leaning, falling over, but they should be held snugly on a shelf so they're kind of supporting each other. You don't want it to be too tight, but enough so that they can provide support to their neighbors. You can get smooth, non-damaging bookends if needed. It's good to try to arrange books unless you have a color scheme or theme that you're trying to go with. But if we're looking for preservation purposes, try to store your books by size. So if you can see on the left-hand side right here, pretty much things are kind of stored larger to smaller from left to right. And that way, the books will be supporting their neighbors. If you have a really tall book, you may want to consider storing it flat, like you can see on the right-hand side. You don't want to stack oversized books too high, but it's certainly fine to have low stacks, and it's more supportive to store them flat than vertically. If you have a book that is too tall to slide onto your shelf and you don't want to store it flat, you can store it on its spine. You don't want to store it on its foredge, which is going to be the edge opposite from the spine, because that's going to create pressure on the text block and that's going to pull out over time. So in the center here, all of those books are stored spine down. And finally, if you have books that are leather bound that are showing that dry rot where the leather is degrading, you want to be sure to not store those next to paper or cloth bound books, because that red rot, which is literally red, is going to rub off and ruin the bindings of other surrounding books. You want to kind of isolate those. Those are good candidates to wrap. You can either get boxes specifically for different sized books, or you can get book covers, or you can just wrap in some tissue paper and tie up with cotton tape. So there are a variety of ways that you can kind of deal with bindings that are falling apart. In terms of handling, this is kind of getting back to what our school librarians told us. You want to be gentle with books. You don't want to, if they're on a shelf, don't pull from the spine. That can cause bindings to break. Instead, you want to pull sort of from the middle of the book and pull it out rather than at an angle. If you have a really large, oversized book, so that you don't create tension on the bindings and strain, you want to open it to the center of the book first and then kind of progress either to the left or right depending on what you need. So you can see here we actually have a book pillow. They sell book cradles as well, which you can, if you have a really large, like some of those old massive dictionaries, you see have their own book stands. So we use this for some of our older books, and you can actually buy like a book pillow from archival suppliers if you're interested. So next, we're going to move on to loose papers and documents. So typical problems that we see on the left, upper left, just a box of papers. Oftentimes, family papers have little to no organization. There may be a mixture of individuals' papers. So you could have 3 generations of papers mixed together, and there's a lot of time that you need to spend just sorting out what is what. Individual sheets of paper, as you can see on the left bottom right corner, can oftentimes be torn and brittle, especially around the edges. Letters in particular, if they were stored folded or in envelopes at those creases may break if you try to unfold a letter, because those fibers wear out over time with the acid that's in the paper. Paper can also become discolored. So in the center, you see that there's discoloration on the lower half of that letter. That's right where a newspaper clipping was stored for a long time. And newspaper clippings, 20th century newspaper clippings, are some of the most acidic paper you'll find. And oftentimes, though, there's a newspaper clipping that was mailed with a letter and the two were stored together, and then it's discolored things. There's a lot of attachments as well that tend to stay in papers, you can see on the right-hand side a rusty paper clip, brads, staples, these things, especially if they are older, pins even, were not made with stainless steel material, and so they have rusted over time. There could also be rubber bands. It looks like a shoelace to me, but that is a rubber band that has fallen apart over time. Those are really insidious because they will stick to paper and can create a big mess. And so those are some of the typical things that you'll see in family papers. In terms of storage, so it's going to be a balance. You know, if you have a box of materials and there's no order to it as well, you need to figure out sort of what sort of organizational scheme do you want to impose on papers. It's one thing if you have a box and there's an order there from the original creator of all of their correspondence and financial records, and they had some sort of rhyme or reason to it. But if there's nothing at all, you'll need to figure out, okay, am I going to arrange things chronologically? Am I going to make it thematic? What sort of order am I going to impose? One thing that you can consider is the size of documents. So even within a chronological, say, organization, it is not going to be great to have really small pieces of paper in the same folder as really large pieces of paper. So you may want to break those out into two separate folders so that the small pieces of paper are not getting lost among the larger pieces. You should also consider the quality of paper of the documents. Because acid in paper will migrate to other documents, you want to isolate really acidic, brittle paper from paper that's in better condition so that the problem doesn't spread. So this in particular applies to newspaper clippings. So if you have newspaper clippings that are mixed in with correspondence, what I would recommend is photographing the newspaper clippings, keeping a photocopy with the original letters so that you can know the context of, say, if the letter's referring to the clipping, and then storing the original newspaper clipping, say, in a separate folder so that that acid is staying in one place. You definitely want to remove fasteners like pins, paper clip, staples, brads. If you want to continue to keep bundles of paper together, you can use either the coated paper clips, plastic paper clips, or they do sell non-rusting paper clips. Or my personal preference is to fold a piece of copier paper and use that sort of as a way to sandwich things together. And what's nice about having that sandwich is that you can also then annotate information about what the contents are. So this is correspondence from 1930 to 1940, and I can write that right on that little sandwich and keep the 5-page letter together, for instance. You want to store documents in acid-free folders. And like I mentioned before, if you aren't able to get acid-free folders, you can use standard office folders and line them with acid-free paper. You don't have to fill every folder to capacity. All the folders are scored so that you can create sort of a gusset at the bottom. You don't have to fill it up necessarily. Try to sort of have an even distribution of documents throughout your collection, and so that they'll be able to support each other better. Documents can be stored vertically or horizontally in boxes. If vertically would be in, like you see here, the document cases with the flip tops. You can store things though horizontally if you choose. What you do want to prevent though is slumping. So let's say you only have half of a box filled. Over time, those folders are going to bend and the contents are going to bend. And so you either want to use a smaller, they make half-size width boxes, or you can use a spacer that's like a piece of cardboard that is scored so that it prevents the folders from coming forward. So you don't want things to fold over time because paper will remember the position that it's in, and then you'll have to flatten things out. If you find a document that is torn, don't try to mend it with paper, with tape or with glue. The chemicals in most adhesives are not going to be archivally sound, and they will hurt the paper. They will lose their efficacy over time, and things will fall out anyways. An example is, there was lots of scrapbooks with things that were put in with rubber cement, and we know how that turns out. Everything's just falling out. And so it's better if you have a document that's in two pieces, to either store those two pieces separately in their own folder, or you can put them into a Mylar sleeve so that you can see everything. It'll stay in place, but that way there won't be any damage done by new chemicals that you've introduced. And then finally, please don't laminate documents. Lamination was this great preservation technique from the mid-20th century. It is not reversible, and the lamination material itself is not archivally sound. And so you just end up introducing a plastic that's going to ruin your documents over time. So please hesitate from the temptation. So next, scrapbooks and ephemera. So there are a couple of different issues with scrapbooks that generally contain ephemera. Oftentimes there are awkward and three-dimensional objects that you find in scrapbooks. I have found things like in a scrapbook that was for memories of a cruise that someone took, salt and pepper packets filled with salt and pepper still. There's organic material, pressed flowers, locks of hair, all types of materials that can attract pests and be prone to mold and just to make a mess over time. Scrapbooks themselves can also be problematic because unless it's a new scrapbook that you're purchasing, that most of the time now is made with archivally sound paper. It used to be that scrapbook pages themselves were some of the lowest quality paper that you could have. And so oftentimes the scrapbooks that we find, it's the pages themselves are falling apart before the mementos attached to them have even begun to degrade. Also, the bindings of scrapbooks can also be pretty precarious, oftentimes with cords or ribbons, and they just don't hold up over time. So in terms of storage, they can be shelved upright or flat, depending on their condition. If they're getting to be brittle, I would definitely recommend a box flat. And so there's an example here. What I would recommend is if it's something that's that is maybe a little smaller than the box that you have, so it doesn't shift back and forth, you can line with some tissue paper, like on the right-hand side, so it doesn't shift and so that it's buffered and protected. A lot of times scrapbooks are going to have detached components that are falling out. Those you can put into separate folders, either still within the scrapbook, but in a folder so it won't fall out, or negative envelopes, or there's lots of different ways that you can isolate those materials so that they don't fall out. If there are organic materials that you're worried about, say for that pack of sugar, what we did was I cut a slit in the packet of sugar, emptied out the sugar itself, and the packet, the wrapper stayed in the scrapbook, but the sugar was gone because the sugar was the thing that I was worried about as far as attracting pests. So take a look at, and if you're creating a scrapbook, consider the type of materials and souvenirs that you're adding to your scrapbook and whether that's going to become problematic going into the future. The good thing, again, is that most scrapbooks nowadays are made out of high quality paper, and so you don't really have to worry about the integrity of the album itself compared with decades past. So now with oversized materials, looking at newspapers, prints, posters, maps, architectural drawings. Some of the issues that we find is that generally people don't have anywhere to store oversized materials, and so they tend to get rolled and the edges get damaged. And when paper is rolled for an extended period of time, it remembers that roll, and it can become very difficult to flatten those items. And eventually they will break over time as the paper continues to lose its flexibility as it ages. Often oversized materials have also been displayed and framed in acidic mats or glass without UV protection that can really fade documents. So you can see some stock certificates there of varying degrees of fading. The good thing is that most framers nowadays will use, at least for their mats, fully archival quality paper. I can't think of any framer that I've worked with who doesn't automatically use that material. The question then becomes, what sort of quality glass do you want to invest in? Because that is not automatically going to have any sort of light protection. So for storage of oversized materials, ideally, you're going to store these materials flat by size in archival quality folders and boxes. And so on the left there, that's one of our map cases. Most people are not going to have that in their homes though. So, if you are really get into your family materials and have some archival or have oversized materials, you can certainly invest in flat storage, and that's the best. But realistically, most people are not going to have that sort of space. And so if you must roll your oversized materials, make sure that the paper is not too brittle. And then you can wrap the item in acid-free tissue and roll it onto a tube that's at least 4 inches in diameter. If the smaller the roll, the more stress you're going to put on the paper and the more damage that's going to occur over time. So at least 4 inches in diameter, and make sure that the ends of the tube are longer than the document that's being rolled, so that those edges don't get torn up and broken. You can wrap the roll in acid-free tissue or Mylar and tie it up with some flat cotton tape. No rubber bands, because those are going to degrade over time. And then you can place in a box like what you see on the right hand side. One thing with blueprints is that you want to make sure that you separate out any blueprints from other types of oversized material. Like newspaper clippings, there are the materials that make blueprints blue are very unstable, and they contribute to quicker degradation of paper than other types of architectural drawings, and that will migrate. So if you do have blueprints, make sure that you're storing them separately and you don't have them intermixed with other types of materials. If you want to frame any documents, again, make sure that you're using acid-free mats and UV protected glass. So our last category is going to be photographs. That a lot of the problems that we see are going to relate to long-term display. So again, a lot of light exposure from photographs that have been displayed in homes and frames. If you've ever had a frame that got some moisture in it, the print may have gotten stuck to glass, and you try to pull it off and it, pulls part of the print right off of it. Those albums that have the magnetic sheets have not held up well over time. The adhesive in those pages just can destroy prints. They get stuck and they start to eat away at the prints. And then finally, negatives can become rippled from heat exposure, or if they start to smell like vinegar, that's called vinegar syndrome, and that's for either negatives or like motion picture film that is telling you that the materials are actively breaking down. Storage for photographs. If we start on the upper left, you do want to store prints and negatives separately, but sort of in close proximity to each other, so that if you do want to be able to reprint a photograph in the future after looking at a print, you know how to find the negative, but you don't want to necessarily store them together. They can be stored in folders within boxes, just like documents, either upright or flat. You can separate individual items from each other by interleaving prints with tissue paper or plain copy paper. And very fragile prints can be housed in mylar sleeves, just like really fragile documents. If you have lots of little snapshots, the shoebox style boxes, like on the left bottom there, can be a really good way to organize, which is another way that you can store 35mm slides. In the center there, there's two techniques. You can either have these long, narrow boxes if you want to be able to flip through your slides, or at the museum, we use the sheets and hang them in filing cabinets. If you have cased photography like daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, or tintypes, those should be stored flat, not on their edges. And you can make on your own these little 4-flap enclosures like you see on the right upper corner there. You can also purchase boxes, but sort of an economical way. We make these in-house, and they're kind of fun to do, are a good way for the cased imagery. If you want to use photograph albums, avoid those with magnetic pages. Most places don't even sell those anymore. There are lots of commercially available albums now, just like with scrapbooks that use archival quality materials. It's really easy to get. And you can either store prints in using photo corners or in plastic pages. It's really best to not permanently try to insert prints or anything, say in a scrapbook, using tape or glue or any sort of adhesive, because again, generally speaking, those materials are not going to be archivally sound. So if it's something that can be removed safely from an album, it also allows you more flexibility if you want to reorganize over time. If you want to frame photographs for display, again, archival mats, UV protected glass, and consider whether you really need to display the original or whether a reproduction can serve the same purpose. That way you don't have to worry about light exposure. You don't need to maybe invest in the more expensive UV protected glass. You could just switch out for another copy of a photograph rather than having the original be slowly destroyed over time. So for photograph handling, you want to make sure that you have clean hands when you're handling prints, negatives, and slides. This is especially important for prints with a glossy finish and for film, because both will show fingerprints really easily. At the museum, we use gloves when handling prints, but if you don't have that available, just try to handle things on their edges. And then finally, we're going to take a quick look at digital photographs. So digital photography presents a new challenge because there's, hardware malfunctions, jump drives can get lost, software becomes obsolete. And really, I think the best advice is to back up in multiple ways. So don't rely on your local hard drive on your computer. Don't rely just on one jump drive. CDs and jump drives can get lost, especially if they haven't been labeled. And so a cloud service is, the way that a lot of people are going. So you can consider investing in something like Microsoft OneDrive and Dropbox, but even then, I wouldn't have that be the only place where I store photographs. So you may store regularly photographs in a cloud service, but also have a backup of a jump drive that you keep in a special place that's labeled so you know exactly what it is. One thing that I personally do is every year I have a family photograph album printed. And so that way I know that even if all my digital photographs disappear, I will have a tangible album. It's also a fun way to kind of remember what you've done as a family over the last year, or over the decades, if you want to go through all, generations of family photographs and have some albums printed. But I think that there is still space in today's world to have physical physical albums. And so an annual album can be sort of a fun way to go. Now, storage of and organization of digital photographs. One drawback to digital photography and sort of the digital world is the lack of, or just dealing with the volume. Whereas before you had to buy that roll of film, pay for the processing that, and the film only had 30 shots on it. Now you can take an endless number of images and it can very quickly become overwhelming to manage all those images. And so, do we really need 500 photographs from an event? It is good practice to regularly review your photography, purge it. Again, how many photographs do you need to document your family reunion? There's going to be missed shots. There's going to be shots that, 5 shots where you're trying to get the right angle. Just save the one that really is the best composed image. And if you can regularly purge, I think you're much more likely to go back to those images and use them going forward. Also, at the time that you're purging, make sure that you're retitling your image files with descriptive titles, not just the automatically generated series of numbers that our phones and cameras give us. Meaningful titles are very helpful. There will be some metadata that is automatically added to all of your imagery, like what the date was it was taken and what type of camera was used, etc. But it can be, I think, helpful to be able to quickly browse a list of files and have that descriptive information, and to make sure that you're organizing your digital photographs into folders that have descriptions as well. Again, the time that you invest in organizing early on will pay out in the long term. And then finally, if you are interested in digitizing your historic family photos, that's great. It really lessens the handling of the original photographs, and it makes it so that you can distribute them to everyone in your family. You can get people to sort of crowdsource with identifications, etc. Don't then toss out the originals. When we digitize at the museum, we're digitizing for reduced handling of originals and for increased access, but we will never get rid of the originals. Paper degrades at a much slower rate than a digital file can be corrupted. And so we can then always go back to an original and rescan it if something goes wrong, if we need a larger file. So think of digitization not as a substitute, but it's just a way to enhance the preservation and access of your family, not just photographs, but any sort of family material. So what do you do when disaster strikes? Water damage is one of the most common and destructive disasters for paper-based materials. And there are certain things where if it gets so much water on it, there's nothing that you can do. But if there's a little bit of water, there are some things that you can do before you call in the professionals. So the technique that you see here is best for, let's say you have a book that just gets some water along its edges, or just a certain part of the text block. You have minor water damage. You want to interleaf the affected pages with single layers of paper towels, and then train a fan on it to try to dry it out. So this is something that you can do with individual documents as well as books, but this would be for, again, minor water damage. If you have photographs that have gotten wet, be sure that you separate immediately any glossy or coated prints. Those become very sticky when wet, and they will stick together, and as they dry, you will not be able to separate them. So if you have any prints that are glossy or have some sort of coating on them, make sure that you're separating those out in single layers. Anything beyond sort of minor water damage, and it's something that you want to try to salvage, you're going to need to call in a professional. And by professional, I mean a conservator. What are the types of treatments that conservators can do. They can rebind books, they can wash paper, they can relax paper to allow a rolled document to lie flat. They can repair tears. So we get a lot of calls from people who say, I have this type of document. I want to find a conservator. We can give a variety of names of conservators in the Richmond area. There's also the Virginia Conservation Association. So I would recommend, if you are in need of a conservator, to go to this website. So these are going to be Virginia conservators that are part of the Virginia Conservation Association, which means that they are serious about the work that they do. And so it's a great way to find somebody who may be able to assist you, not just with something that it may be the result of a leak or something like that, but if there's, something that just needs some love that you want to invest in. And then finally, we've been talking a lot about the physical preservation of materials, but preserving the intellectual information related to your family papers and photographs is really important too. And by that, I mean, who created your family papers? When and where were they made? What are the family stories and special meanings that are associated with these materials? So it can be frustrating to read over papers and have no idea who a particular family member is because you don't recognize their handwriting, or it's letters that aren't using names and just nicknames, so you don't know who that they are. Why was a particular document saved? What significance was there? Or was it just that someone never threw anything out? And so sort of the significant papers are mixed in with the old telephone bills. So to help with this, as you're organizing family papers, call in family elders who may know about family events and past relatives. Write down places, events, names on folders and boxes. So really make sure that you're being descriptive as you're housing papers, to say that this is correspondence between this person and this person on this topic in this date range. And it takes a lot of time, but the investment really pays off so that future generations will know what they're looking at. You can conduct interviews and oral histories with older family members. And like I mentioned before, crowdsource, if you are digitizing all your family photographs and your family is far flung, you can send out a batch of digital images and challenge people. Who knows who's in these photographs, where was it taken, what date was it, and you can compile all of that. I would suggest that you try to not actually write the descriptions on the documents themselves. Try to write it on the housing materials. So either in the folder, or if you, again, have one of those pieces of paper that's kind of creating a sandwich, write it on that. But certainly plenty of people, we find lots of photographs with descriptions written on the back. And quite frankly, I'd prefer to have that than to have nothing. So having the intellectual content, to know the significance, the details about why these things are important and why you should save them is, in my mind, of equal importance to making sure that you are physically preserving those materials. And so I mentioned before that I have a handout that summarizes some of the things that I said. It also lists some archival readings about sort of practical preservation, as well as some of the archival suppliers. And that is here and will get shared in the chat. And so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop my share, and we can kind of open it up for any questions people have. Okay.
Thank you so very much, Meg. You have given us so much food for thought, and I know all of us have work that we need to do based on what you have said. There are a number of questions in the chat. At first, Greg has put that handout in the chat. For those of you who can download it, you can click on the three dots and download it from the chat. We also can email it to you to the email address under which you registered for this session. And so we will take care of that so that you will have it. The first question, Meg, is you talked about making a homemade, if you will, container for the daguerreotypes. What would that, what do you make those out of? What is the
That's a
material?
good. So if you, it's really the same material that archival folders are made out of. So I have fashioned one of those four fold enclosures, just cutting up an archival folder. You can buy big sheets of it as well. But if you're going to buy, I would recommend just investing in archival folders, and then there's a lot of flexibility in what you can use them for. And so you could use that to make an enclosure for a daguerreotype as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. Francine had asked this question, which you may have answered in part, and her question was, they are recommended vintage photograph restoration business in the Richmond area. And so I guess it's whether the Virginia conservation folk cover photographs.
It does. So if you look at their Find a Conservator page, it'll list conservators in their region, but also their specialties. So you can seek out a painting conservator, photography conservator, paper conservator, etc.
Thank you so much for that. And Ms. Conley wants to know do you have suggestions for going about how to identify people in photographs?
Well, some of it is how familiar you are with your, because I'm going to assume that much of the photography that you'd be looking at is family photography. And so it's how familiar you are with your relatives and how they looked at different times in their lives. It's amazing how much people can change over time. And so that's where people who knew the relatives the best are going to give you the most reliable identifications. Definitely landmarks in photographs are going to be helpful for dating photographs and providing geographic areas. Looking at, the years of cars, if there's a landmark in the background and you know that it went up a certain year, you're going to know that, well, this photograph can't be any earlier than such and such a date. Sometimes there are very few contextual clues. And so it makes it harder for dating. It's, you just have to kind of use a variety of techniques, and hopefully you'll be starting with some positive identifications on some prints that you can then compare with other imagery to try to make other identifications.
Thank you. So Carrie Holman would like to know, how do you preserve a photo in a bubble frame that is curved when the frame or glass is broken? Does anyone sell bubble frames in glass?
That is a good question. We have a couple of examples in our collection. Luckily, the glass is not broken. I would definitely search online, and everything seems to be sale on Amazon, but I'd bring it into a glass shop. Like we have Binswanger in Richmond, and I'd bring it in to see if they have any recommendations, because I have not seen that for sale in quite a bit, and so I don't. It may have to be something that's custom, but you may be able to find something secondhand, like through eBay. On the secondhand market, where you could, if there is another frame that you can find where the glass is intact and it's the right size, and you may be able to switch out the glass.
Okay, thank you. Kim Taylor would like to know, which is better to use, cotton gloves or vinyl gloves?
So for archival material, first of all, I would say that the vast majority of the time, we don't wear gloves at all if it's paper-based. So if it's handling letters, most books, unless we have the red rot problem, which is, where it's making the mess, in most cases, clean hands are going to give you the most dexterity. And I find that with really brittle paper, wearing gloves, cotton, or we wear nitrile, not vinyl, will actually catch more on little tears in paper and create more damage. So we don't wear gloves with most archival material except for photography. And that's where cotton versus nitrile, it's sort of a generational thing. I think that either are fine. It's really sort of personal preference.
Okay, thank you. So Marilyn South wants to know, Meg, what are your thoughts about putting an old book putting it in a freezer before the book is put out for display or use?
Yeah, so that is, some institutions, and we do this occasionally, if there is a thought that there may be the potential for any sort of pests that may be coming in with a book, or any mold, we may put it in a freezer. The thing that you want to do is make sure that once it's frozen, that to reverse the process, you have to slowly bring it back. What you don't want to do is have condensation introduced as it warms up. If it warms up too quickly, condensation can be introduced, which will then damage the item. So you just want to be careful with freezing it. I would not recommend doing that without it being under the supervision of a conservator. So you may want to consult with a conservator about that, because you don't want to create a bigger problem by having water droplets.
Joanne would like to know, how do you index your photo collection so that you can search by person or subject and locate the item?
So much of our photograph collection is actually individual photograph collections. And so we have family photograph collection. So it may be the Smith family photograph collection, and it's all physically together, or it may be a particular photography studio that has its own collection, or a particular business. And we catalog our collection in a collection management database called Proficio. And that includes descriptive information about the physical object and the contents of the image. And the system allows us to tag it with subject headings, so that if it's a photograph of, say, somebody outside of Richmond City Hall, we can tag it with, Richmond City Hall, Broad Street, let's say it was a daguerreotype, we can tag it as being a photograph and a cased image, and all of those subjects are ones that we can then allow us to kind of cross-reference. And so basically we use our collections management database to be able to access it. We don't, at this point, we don't use Excel or anything like that. We've gone to a larger system.
Thank you. So Julie Franklin says that she needs to have a torn oil portrait repaired. Is there anyone in Richmond that she could consult?
Yeah, there are a couple of different painting conservators in the Richmond region. I'd recommend that you go to the Virginia Conservation Association and to their Find a Conservator page, and you should be able to filter out to some people in the region.
Thank you. And Kathy Phillips says, can a photo album be used to display old photos? If so, what is the best kind? And how do you attach or place them in the album?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, photograph albums still are a great way to display old photos. And what's really nice is that for the most part, unless you have it displayed open, those prints aren't getting constant light. And so they aren't going to be fading over time and becoming more and more brittle. So it's a fine way to do it. You want to make sure that you're buying a photograph album that is made of archival paper, and you can get that through any of the archival suppliers, or again, I mean, most places like Michael's or Hobby Lobby or other craft places now, the quality of albums is much better than it was in the past. And so you can use the photo corners, definitely. That way you are not permanently adhering any prints to any pieces of paper. You can also buy albums that have sort of the plastic inserts and you can slide the prints in. A lot of times it'll allow you to put like 2 prints in, and then the center, there's a sheet of paper that you can pull out and write descriptions on, and that's great. So albums are also another way to be able to annotate your photos, which is wonderful. So that's where you can put your identifications without having to actually write them on the back of the prints.
Thank you. So Bob Pritchett would like to know, how stable is Xerox or other copy paper, inkjet, as opposed to laser copies?
So regular copy paper is actually pretty good quality, to be honest. It's not the top of the line. It's not acid-free archival paper, which you can buy, but is expensive. But when you compare your average ream of copy paper to, say, newspaper clippings, it is much more stable. So I, without any fear, use regular copy paper quite regularly to sandwich things together if I'm taking out staples and that sort of thing as a cost, as sort of an economical way. So I would not be afraid of just regular copy paper. Again, it is not acid-free, but it's still pretty good quality. Inkjet as opposed to laser copies. Laser is going to be better quality over time. I don't know, specifically what the rates are, but laser prints do tend to be of higher quality than inkjet. So I would recommend recommend laser over inkjet long term.
Thank you. A number of other questions in the chat, but I saw Carolyn Barley's hand up. Are you still there with a hand up? May have lost her. So, but if she comes back, then we'll hear her question. Kim Taylor wants to know, what is the humidity level we should strive for when storing papers, photos, and books?
So this is going to be assuming that you don't have a dedicated space for your papers. It's going to be a negotiation with your historic materials and yourself, because ideally you would be storing your family papers and photographs in 70 degrees, 50% humidity. That's like the goal. But most people aren't going to want to have their house at that level. And so really sort of normal, for assuming that you were not trying to achieve museum environmental conditions. Again, it's sort of a normal condition space that's comfortable for you is generally going to be fine for papers, because we're trying to be practical about it. If you do have rooms in your house that get really humid, I would not recommend that you store things there. Really, the humidity is humidity that isn't too high and that also doesn't swing. The humidity, if the humidity is too high, you get potential for mold and mildew, but also constant swings in temperature and humidity levels stress the paper. And so it's those swings that will help contribute to the degradation of the paper. So it's not just keeping a low humidity and somewhat low temperature, it's also a stable environment where things aren't changing up and down all the time.
Thank you. Bob Pritchett says, do you have a suggestion about how to keep track of locations of family materials if over the generations they have gone to different archives? It is easy for later generations to lose track of such materials.
Well, I'm assuming this means that maybe different parts of your family papers have maybe gone to different institutions, or maybe there were different family members. I mean, I always, the goal for me is to try to get things together. So, if someone comes to us saying, I've got my family papers, I'd like to donate them to you, I asked, do you have family papers at other institutions already? And if they are, I say, please add them. So because you don't necessarily want to have your family's papers in 5 different institutions. I think it's doing research to figure out where they are and compiling it into a document and then sending it out to as many family members as you think may be interested. Generally speaking, those collections are probably going to stay where they are unless an institution decides to deaccession a collection and maybe transfer it to another institution. We've certainly done that before. We've been doing a big refinement of our collection, and there's some manuscript collections that I found where we sort of had one half of the papers and another museum in town had the other half. And so we were able to co-locate them, which was really great. So you have, rather than two places, you've got one place to go. But I think it's knowing where everything is, compiling it into a document and making sure that you distribute that document to other family members.
Another question, Meg. Would you comment about maintaining electronic files? Like if you scan your documents or have things that are electronic files, what do you do about making sure that those stay such that you can access them? Do you migrate to upgrade periodically, or how do you make sure that you can access the files of 20 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, you do want to, migration is a thing. Luckily, there are some more sort of stable, long-term sort of archival file types that have stayed stable over time. So, for instance, when we digitize a photograph, our archival quality scan is a TIFF file. And it's a large file. It's a lossless file type, meaning it doesn't compress any information and it can always be sized down. So basically, if I would go with, I would go with a sort of, I wouldn't try, if there's like a new file type out there, I wouldn't try it out. I would just go with what seems to be sort of the consensus. So for us, it's TIFF files are archival quality, and then access, we will size things down as JPEGs. JPEGs are very stable as well. They've been around for a really long time. And so that, I think that's fine too. I think it gets trickier when you get into like audiovisual and sound, and that is not my area at all. And so I think it's just periodically making sure you can continue to access your files. And it's kind of like finding a box of old floppies and realizing that you don't have something that'll play them anymore. If you come across something like that, you can bring them in somewhere and get them transferred. There are even companies now where you can like you can mail out your old version or old formats and have them come back and be digitized. That's something you just have to kind of remain engaged in changing technology to know when there are shifts and not just tuck things away. And so that is one reason to not just put things on a CD or a jump drive, because you put it away, you may not access it for years. At least if you have put things in a cloud storage, that is something that you have to sort of more actively engage with. And so you will not forget about it. The unfortunate thing about digital materials is that you have to actively maintain them and engage with them. You can't just, like with paper materials, you can just put them in a box, put it in a closet, forget about it for 20 years. And unless something happens, they'll pretty much look the same that they did 20 years ago when you pull them out and rediscover them. That's not going to be the case necessarily for technology.
All right. Thank you. Well, this has been most enlightening. We're close to the end of our time. We certainly appreciate all you shared with us, Meg. Are there any final questions that anyone has before we close? Okay. Well, again, Meg, thank you so much for sharing with us. We truly appreciate it. We hopefully the next time we'll be able to welcome you to Middlesex in person, but we certainly appreciate your virtual visit. And again, from the Middlesex County Museum, thanks to all of you for joining us. as I indicated, we invite you to visit the museum. We invite you to explore our website, middlesexmuseum.com. And this lecture will be available on our website if you'd like to listen again, or if you know folks who missed it. And we've had a series of virtual lectures over the past 2 years that we've been in pandemic mode. And so all of them are on the website. So we invite you to explore all of that. And so again, thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you so much, Meg, and everyone. Please have a great week, a great Thanksgiving, and do be safe. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.